Video that you're about to watch is a live stream that I recorded live. Now, if the content that you find doesn't really match what you're looking for, it's very possible that this is a video that's part of a series. So if it doesn't make sense where you're finding this particular video, then just click on the description down below and you will find a link that will take you to the full series, and you can start with video number 1 and go through all of the videos in sequence. If you like the content and it helps you out, then great. If you'd like more information, then you can always check me out at FileMakerMagazine.com. All right, hello and welcome. This is lesson number 3, and we're just going to be trucking through these lessons learning about FileMaker. If, like the intro said, if you need, I will be putting a link into the description so that you can go back to video 1 and start there if you want. We are taking a look at properly formatting our code. In the previous lesson, we took a look at just initially getting used to parsing. Parsing is something we do in all of FileMaker. In fact, most of software, we are simply extracting patterns out of data. So we ended up with this situation right here where we were pulling some information out. Now, what we're ultimately going to end up with is a really nice structured JSON. In fact, we'll take a quick look at that. If you didn't see the previous video, here it is right there. You can see here is a custom function that I created called AAMVA based on the standards that I found. Also a previous video that I recorded in this series, and we are simply formatting it and we get this really nice output. Ultimately, we're going to be getting that into fields in our FileMaker database. It's all done for us. We don't have to do a whole lot. We just have to know how to use FileMaker to get it in. But before we do that, let's take a look at properly formatted code. If you have not taken the time to learn how to format your code, you are not doing a favor for someone else. You are doing a favor for yourself. If you write crappy code down the road, you will be mad at yourself because you wrote crappy code. If you write clean code, then it will be so much easier to understand, not just for yourself, but also for other people. So let's look at this and let's really think about things when we write our code. The number one thing that we see in this scenario is this right here and this right here. They are exactly the same. Now, in all of programming, not just FileMaker, there is an acronym called DRY, which stands for Do Not Repeat Yourself. We are going to pay attention. Every time that we write code, we are going to pay attention to the very first time that a new instance of something else occurs. That is going to be in our calculations. It is also going to be in our scripts. If you write a script and then you write another script and 80% of it seems the same, stop right there and revise your thinking. You want to make things so that you don't have to repeat yourself. The number one and best way within FileMaker's calculation dialog box to not repeat yourself is a function called let. Now, some FileMaker developers come across this much later in their careers, and in my opinion, this is probably the first thing that you should learn. In your home or wherever you live, I would imagine that before it becomes too cluttered, you like to clean things up and put them in their proper places. That is exactly what the let function is. It is like an organizer. It is a cubbyhole type of situation. Now, not as it stands right here where it gives you this long expression. Our goal is, number one, to not have code that extends beyond and then wraps. So if we have code that hits the end of the line here and then wraps over, this can become very painful to look at. We want to have code that's very easy to look at. In fact, some languages, what they do is they limit you to the column length that you can code up to. In fact, an application called a linter, which FileMaker does not have, but in JavaScript or in PHP, other languages, if your line goes beyond column 80, it actually warns you. It throws a little error and says, I'm sorry, you're really not doing yourself any favors by making this hard. So we are going to use the let function, but we're going to use a particular format of the let function. There are multiple ways that you can do this, and I'll give you the two that I like the most. I am going to use an expansion. You can see right here as I don't have my my let. I am on a different account right now, so I don't have my expansion tool, which I will have to put onto this system. In fact, by intention, this whole system is just completely brand new FileMaker, everything. None of the things that I'm used to are here because I'll shoot videos setting those things up so that you can also use the same tools that I do. So we need to actually use that let statement and put it into a format that makes sense. First off, understanding FileMaker's functions. Let's zoom in a little bit more here. Anytime that we see these open braces as opposed to brackets, it's important to learn the terminology. The braces indicate that something is optional. So in this first optional thing, we're saying that the bracket is optional, and then any additional variable is optional. So let's break this down and make it what it looks like if it's not optional. You have let var1 equal expression. Let's go ahead and just copy that right there. Then you have this required part right here. So we'll copy that. This is the bare minimum of a let function right there. The let function says, I want to use, now I think of these as cubby holes. Anything that you store in a variable is stored in memory. It's not stored in a permanent place within FileMaker. It is stored within the memory that FileMaker reserves when it loads up. So let's do a little hypothetical situation. Your computer has 32 gigabytes of RAM. Your operating system is using 10. That means there's 22 gigabytes left. Let's say when FileMaker loads up, it requests 1 gigabyte of RAM. This is all just, I'm using straight numbers here. It's not exactly how it works. That reserved RAM is there to be used very much like a table space. That table space, you can put papers on it and you can shuffle those papers around. Now the problem is when you have a table space and it's too full of too many papers, you can't do any shuffling. That would be when you have maximized your RAM or maximized your storage. We're not really worried about that. We have so many gigabytes of RAM in our modern day computers. Of course, you're not going to be shoving like high resolution images into variables, but we can store whatever we want, and these can be named whatever we want. I can call a variable whatever. I can also call a variable today. I can also call a variable now. Now, when I give you those keywords, that's a very important thing to recognize about variable naming. If I was going to put now, and I was going to say get current timestamp, there we go, that's pretty representative. Setting a variable to whatever equal to get current timestamp is not clean code, because I now have to guess a month or a little while later what this actually is. Whereas if I say now, or if I say time now, or now time, and I just happen to learn that now is just something that comes from PHP when I learned PHP programming, but this becomes very cool. I can now say the time now is, and then I can concatenate now. Now here's in my next disagreement with some other standards other than my own. What you're going to see is something that I prefer to do. I prefer to make it such that right now, the only distinction between these two, between these values, is that I can see this is right here, but the only thing that distinguishes if these were gone is nothing, and the only thing that distinguishes the closing of this is that quote right there. I like to be able to know very clearly what is my variable and what is my literal text or my calculation. Now in all of FileMaker, we can see that a field is identified by double colons. So those double colons tell me this is the field name, this is the table occurrence name, or the alias name. We'll get into that down the road where we talk about how do you distinguish. But for right now, what I like to do is I like to use the tilde. But you can use any ASCII character in front of this. I could, if I wanted to, use the percent sign. In fact, some other languages use percent whatever as placeholders. Look up the printf or the sprintf functions in C, I believe. But this to me makes it much more clear in terms of seeing where my variables are. So let's take our example that we learned in the earlier one and let's break it down into a let function where we now have to, once we go beyond one variable, We can see that as soon as we want variable number 2, because of our opening and closing brackets, braces here, that I am going to need my brackets. So it becomes very easy, once you become familiar with FileMaker, to be able to write these calculations without having to think a whole lot. Some developers like to put the opening bracket on the next line. I like to put the opening bracket on the same line, then I hit a return, and then I indent. Now, if you don't know, on the Macintosh and on Windows, you can put an indentation or a tab character into the calculation dialog box. On the Macintosh, it is Option tab, and on Windows, I believe it may be Control tab. This is where I'm going to start my values. And the first value that I'm going to be referencing is I have a data value. In this case, that's just a very generic term, but this is my first opportunity to get rid of this value because it is repeated twice. So I'm going to cut that, and I'm going to say that data is equal to that. I'm going to hit another return, and now I'm going to put my closing bracket that allows me to have multiples. Now, I like doing this even if you have only one value because we're making our code easier to read. We come right in and it's readable code. So I have data. That data is going to be get value. In this case, we could actually even be more specific if we wanted to. I could say last name. But is it truly the last name? Is it the last name or is it the last name string? Because the last name is the result of what I want to get. So we are going to take our calculation here and we are going to move the calculation from just being a calculation itself to being the result part. I'll insert a tab right there. So I am going to take this value, and it's simply just a matter of referencing things when we're going to do this. So I'm going to put the last name string here, and I'm going to copy this one and put the last name string here. We can see that we're getting the same result, and in some regards it may feel like you're adding more text and code than you need to, but that's okay. We are looking for clarity over some of our concerns. There is no performance concern here in this scenario. So now we look at this and we say, what is some other ways that we could make this a little bit more readable? Well, first off the bat, I can see, okay, right here, if I came in and I knew nothing about this code, I can see that it says last name string. Okay, I'm dealing with a last name. I get that because I can see that out of this. But you can take things as far as you want to in order to convey clarity. You can see right here that whenever we have these opening and closing brackets, each list item in FileMaker on its own line, provided it's not the last line, has to have a semicolon. So if I'm going to add another line, I can simply add a new variable right here and say last name. So why would I want to do this? Well, you can make this as easy to understand so that you only have to process the function parts when you need to. In other words, in that scenario, when this is right here and I come into this calculation, I have to figure out, okay, it's taking the last name string and it's taking the middle of that, it's going to character number 4, it's taking the length of that string and subtracting it by 3. That means it's taking, I had to think about this. I don't have to think about this if I designate what the result is in a readable variable. So if I put the last name is equal to, and I move this up into the top part, see, it really doesn't matter where the calculation is done in this context. What matters is your ability to break things down into little pieces that makes it easier for you to understand as you create, but also to understand after it's been created. And right now, as a result, I can say the result of all of this let function is the last name. And I get the result that I want. So now what I can see is I can read this very quickly and say, oh, this is returning the last name. Oh, well, what's the last name? How is it composed? Well, it's created out of the last name. Okay, the last name is using a middle function on the last name string. In my opinion, what I've done for myself or my future self is I've made it much easier for me to understand and use this code. I've also made it dry, meaning I have not repeated myself, because if I choose to use a different field from over here, all I have to do is simply double click this one thing and replace the field. It is a one-stop shop that allows me to replace all of the code for all of the rest of this calculation. And that's what we're trying to do in all of our FileMaker solution. We're trying to do it in our calculations, in our scripts, and in the whole file. And as we'll see, there is no point in me taking the time to put this in a calculated field where I'm only going to potentially use it, where I could only potentially use it once, where if I'm going to take the time to parse all of this information, I should put this into one place where the whole file can use it. And that happens to be within custom functions. So we will see that in custom functions, and I am introducing you right off the bat here within video 3, 4, and 5 to some of the areas that a lot of FileMaker developers don't get to until much later. But if you understand these at the beginning of your FileMaker career, you're on a much faster path in order to become a better FileMaker developer much quicker. So we are going to go through the process that I went through in order to break down the processing of this American driver's license and parse it. Again, if you are in a foreign country, go find that standard. Let's contribute to this application. Let's make it work for more than just the United States. Let's make it work for all over the place and grow this thing. I'm going to contribute my time here for those of you that want to learn. And if you actually do some development that I'm not going to do, we can contribute that development to this solution, and maybe it'll help everybody else out who is needing some type of application where they can scan it, at least right now, scan a driver's license. But who knows, in the future, maybe this application will grow much larger. So thanks a lot for watching. I'm keeping these videos right around 15 minutes, and I will see you in the next one. I am shooting these in many times in marathon sequence, but sometimes I'll do them one-offs as well. So much luck to you, and see you in the next video.